Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And today we have this sixth meeting of systemic, transformative, and resilient interventional drivers for education for sustainability. And as you know, this project is carried out by our network, Global Sustainable Futures Progress Through Partnership. And so today's agenda was to give you an update on the project that is part 0, and then part 1, and then talk on the methodology. So we will carry on. So as most of you are already aware, but those who have joined recently, in part 0, we are trying to answer the question why we need to repurpose education and what could be our priorities for this transformation. In this part 0, we emphasize the role of education. We also substantiate the need for repurposing education in any type of learning environment, whether it is formal or informal, whether it is strategically gained through systematic accumulation of knowledge exchange process, or it is constructed in social environment in which we live and work. But here is the difference. The purpose of gaining education and putting into practical application is not only the job, and not only for having a job or employability purpose, but to make informed decisions and policies, may it be at individual, institutional, community, or global level. It is directed to achieve or contribute to sustainable societies and economies, as well as addressing the impacts of climate change. We also highlight that a novel approach is needed for both this research project as well as to deliver the excellence in educational spaces that the Education for Sustainable Development is calling for. In part 1, we are exploring the state of play, and this we are doing through case study methodology. However, here too, we have adopted a unique technique to attract multidisciplinary perspectives, including multilateral, transnational, and integrated approaches. So as a result of part 0, literature review, it was revealed that there remain several questions to answer about the content and the state of our technology and efficient management of the courses or education delivered to increase the excellence in educational space that could contribute to education for sustainable development. This let us ask many compounded questions called meta questions. And each one of these questions have sub-questions, and that is why we call it meta questions. So the first meta question we have developed 6 meta questions and from the part 0. And I will just quickly go through that 6 meta questions. And the first meta question is, what is the current context of the education system? At what levels they are at what levels they are today, and what level of excellence they need to achieve, and how they can get there in a way that informs sustainability decisions. And this is what we are trying to engage through the case study survey questionnaire, which I will come back to it. So the second meta question is, what education systems do we need to promote if the goal is not just to educate students and prepare them for jobs, but also to enable them as decision makers to strengthen resilience, social justice, and inclusiveness? The answer to this question will be partly informed by the research findings of meta question 1 and partly by expanding on inquiries with relevant stakeholders, for example, vocational educational providers and professional trainers and employers. The third meta question is, how can we identify strategic intervention points that can leverage transformational systematic change? And the answer to this question will be partly again informed by part 1 and 2, and then we will expand our inquiries with relevant stakeholders. And here we might consider administrators, senior level managers, and policymakers and regulators. The fourth meta question is given that a single project, that is our innovation or change or initiative, does not power the change, does not have the power to change the system. Then how can the portfolio of projects be initiated and managed to impact on the systemic transformation? The answer to this question again will be partly informed by the previous meta questions, but also we will expand our inquiries with relevant stakeholders. And here we believe that the stakeholders would be from many parts of the projects who must have been doing emerging projects or who have been identified through the synthesis of last 3 parts. And the final fifth, and the last but one, fifth meta question is, how can we make systemic, transformative, and resilient interventions for excellence in education for sustainability more participatory and representative? And the answer to this question will again be partly informed by previous meta questions and the relevant inquiries through the stakeholders that would debate and discuss and critique the results of part 4. And that would be students, professional, teachers, trainers, while also caring for accessibility, usability, inclusion, and diversity, and so on, the perspectives brought from spatial groups. And finally, the sixth meta question is what we will cultivate, how we will cultivate a community of decision makers who self-identify as proactive change agents and take responsibility for the future sustainable education and societal systems. The answer to this question again will be partly formed by all previous meta questions, but also it will include some inquiry and relevant relevant leaders. And this includes individuals and institutions who have experience of cultivating a community of practice. So the part 1 is answering the meta question, which I have already mentioned. And now we are trying to engage with the case study 2. And in this case study, what we want that when you are writing any concept, or say, for example, digital technology is the emerging platform for online education or is facilitating online education towards sustainable development. However, we want you to think that so these case studies could be like examples here I have given in this one, that it could be online education or lifeline education. These are only examples. So just out of my mind, but you might come across many other different examples. And I have gone through these 17 case studies, 11 case studies submitted by people, which I'll come to them in a future slide as well. So sorry again, and here these are the questions which I was saying, how that particular system stands today, what is the need to look into in the future, what transition pathways it can take, how that education system mobilize knowledge capital in service of sustainability transition, both from the individual perspective, institutional perspective, as well as from the global sustainable development perspective, and how it can build portfolios of assets that unlock synergies from combinational effects in the wider societal well-being. And we want you to analyze or answer this question so that we understand how that case study stands now and how it would look into future. So again, kindly note that the survey questionnaire link is provided in this presentation, and we have extended also the time to response to this survey. Initially it was 4th April, but extended to 14th April. And so we want some really good case studies to understand what are the innovative educational spaces being created now, or maybe from many recent years. So the part one, let us see what we have received so far in the part one. What we have received, say, for example, these are directly, I have copied from the responses that I have received. We have received only 12 responses at the moment, whereas one was repeating, so I have deleted that, but 11 responses I have put here. And the concepts come out that non-formal holistic and ecological educational practices integrated to school and community vegetable gardens, agroecology and local sustainable development. And so this, fortunately, we have the author of this study here today, Atilia. So yes, thank you for putting this concept through the survey. Sustainable product design education. One of the respondent has mentioned about how they are changing the production through design, sustainable design. And that application has been common in technologies such as laptop or any other. But they have mentioned that such technology, product design should be in your mind, and that should be integrated into education. Next is rising awareness of sustainable development goals through ecological projects in higher education. And the next is using stimulations of large systems, that is systems thinking, to allow students to understand the interconnected components or subsystems that fall across the entire system. And this is prevalent in chemical engineering education. And that should be commonly used when we are thinking about education, educating students. Also, online assessment with timed and randomized constraint to avoid unwanted and undesirable peer-to-peer learning during assessment. Automated marking, especially for mathematical intense engineering course. So this is talking about how we should assess students' performance. And yes, that is a part of our education, though not main this, but however, it is good to know how we should be assessing students' performance. Another, these responses are saying that mapping synergies and trade-offs between energy access and the achievement of sustainable development goals. This methodology has now been applied in other sectors, but also need to consider energy, including sanitation and so on. So they are talking again about system thinking and mapping synergies, understanding interconnections, and identifying trade-offs. Digital technology, especially online teaching, is emerging. However, lack of connectivity and affordability is the biggest challenge. This was given by 2 respondents. Development of socio-economic skills under pedagogical sociodrama. So we have one respondent from the art and culture, art and culture education, and they mention about this. Using environmental education as a path to sustainable communities and establishing ways to consolidate the theme of sustainability and sustainable development goals through the school context. So they are mentioning that we should be trying to educate students since schooling. And green logistic as a module offered by CILT International is key to greening all supply chains. And the focus is to come up with a balance in the triple bottom line, namely business, society, and environment. There ought to be policies that ensure sustainable business practices across all chains and thereby contributing to attainable sustainable development goals. And I refer to Tom here. He just mentioned in our informal chat that this is very much needed to focus on the triple bottom line. And finally, we had one very interesting response that instead of reducing the problems to the bubbles of the surface, fragmented issues or reduced academic formats or segmented public policies, the problems are defined and dealt within the core of the boiling point where they emerge. And in the sociocultural learning niches, hermeneutic approaches generate awareness, interpretation, and understanding beyond established stereotypes in view of thematic and epistemic and a strategic perspective. Communication, advocacy, public policy, research, and teaching programs combine all dimensions of being in the world that is legitimate, interactive, social, and biophysical. As donors and recipients, to elicit the events, deal with the consequences, and organize for change. I think this was really good theoretical response. And that all these responses and the critique from received from the Professor Harrison yesterday made me think about the methodology. And today I will just discuss the philosophy underlying our methodology. So from a social science research methodology perspective, the purpose of research design is to guide the research process from philosophical underpinnings to data collection and analysis method in order to solve or address the research problem. Whilst we know that the basic driver should be the research problem, there are a number of other factors to be considered in the choice of methodology and the design, which I will discuss now. So fundamentally, there are several approaches to research design. For example, Crotty proposed a framework of 4 interrelated research design elements such as epistemology, theoretical perspective, methodology, and techniques. Likewise, Saunders also presented a research process based on onion method, which systematically connects layers from the outer layer to an inner layer. These layers include philosophies, approaches, strategies, choice, time horizon, and techniques and procedures. And this also aligns with the nested approach proposed by Kaigula et al. 1998, which constitute of 3 concurrent rings, which are philosophies, approaches, methodologies, and techniques. So research philosophy in the term associated with the knowledge is the term associated with the knowledge inquiry and knowledge development. According to Bhattacharya, knowledge created by scientific research constitute of 2 main parts. One is a systematic and organized body of the knowledge acquired in any area of inquiry using scientific method, and the knowledge contributing to the body of science. Also, according to Collins and Husey 2013, a scientific research is based on philosophical perspective and assessment, assumptions made about the nature of society. And the objective inquiry often provides us causal explanations which consider objectivism as reality. Whereas on the other hand, subjective scientific inquiry offers logical explanation, which considers subjectivism as reality. Therefore, core assumptions underlying a scientific research are epistemology and ontology. Epistemology is defined as general set of assumptions about the best way of inquiring into the nature of world. And ontology is explained as assumptions that we make about the nature of reality. Depending on the epistemological and ontological assumption, research is positioned and examined to gain understanding of the research problem. So these assumptions constitute a research paradigm. A paradigm is defined as basic belief system or the worldview that guides the investigation, where the paradigm is a global view that can help decision-making about the nature of reality and of knowledge. There are several research paradigms that allow the acquisition of knowledge. Having said this, normally in social science, real life issues and problems are investigated applying 4 research paradigms as seen in this figure. It can be seen from this figure that there are primarily 4 paradigms, which are functionalist, interpretive, radical humanist, and radical structuralism. These paradigms correspond to ontological aspects, that is radical change and social order, also called regulation. And the objectivism and subjectivism. So accordingly, radical change assumes that the organizational problems can be dealt with by changing the current state. By the same token, social order assumes that the organizational problems can be dealt by regulating problems within the current state. So it is important to note that the objectivism positions social entity as an object and external reality to social actors. Equally important, subjectivism positions social phenomena as reality, created by the actions of the social actors. Therefore, subjective research carried out to understand the reality is termed as social constructivism. The reality is understood through communication, knowledge, and shared meaning. Further, in relation to this figure, the bottom left quadrant of the functionalist paradigm underlies assumption of a social order and objectivism, that is positivism research approach. Likewise, the bottom right quadrant of the interpretivism paradigm underlies assumptions of social order and subjective research approach. Thus, it is argued that interpretivism embraces the social constructivism approach. Having considered paradigms and underpinning philosophies, it is important to consider how to position a research problem, especially in complex scenario, as positioning as versus positioning research in a single paradigm, and that can constrain the understanding. Like if the research is positioned in a single paradigm, then it can constrain the understanding and interpretation of the phenomena. So in this respect, we can adopt pragmatism, that is pragmatic attitude, which can help positioning the research between the continuum of positivism and interpretivism. So for instance, educational processes can be viewed as orderly with respect to activities required for academic performance. but then it can be viewed as undergoing change with respect to activities required for education for sustainable development or uncertain problems. Such educational processes can be researched adopting multiple paradigms. Likewise, the academic literature also emphasizes the use of multiple philosophies and applying a mix of epistemological position and methodologies to the research problem. And Atalya, I would remind you, just now you mentioned that we need to develop the methodologies that are applicable to our problem. And that's what I mean here. So two fundamental assumptions are made in this social constructivism. One, reality is constructed through social interaction and thus have many different perspectives. Second, reality is the knowledge of the world gained by the people through objective fact. There is a general argument on what is reality, because only by accepting this reality, people would be able to execute social activities. So within a chosen reality, the human behavior is understood subject to that particular time and space. This type of condition can be named as limited positivism or fixed constructivism. Here, social institutions can be treated as objects by the social constructivist. But, for example, the concept of utility maximization could be replaced by social value, and utility can be measured using attributes like happiness instead of material consumption. Such approaches to education have potential to change unsustainable perceptions towards the societal goods and services. According to Fellows and Liu, interpretivism assumes that collective interpretations are developed when a group of people having a common cultural context, including history, values, beliefs, and purpose, carry out actions to produce emerging trends. In effect, the emerging trends represent collective common interpretation produced due to their cognitive, evaluating, acting, and learning and sense-making processes. When the research is carried out using real-world experiences, the findings are usually interpreted from the participant's perspective. And the paradigm-oriented is called integrated constructivism, interpretivism. These are theoretical positions make an important contribution to appreciate the importance and impact of research philosophical positioning of this research. Given a high consideration to make social integration between multiple realities, this research requires to gather information on perspective held by individuals, institutions, and interinstitutionals or intra-institutionals. To understand the perspective combining factual and tactic, that is factually, that is science, and tactile is latent knowledge. And to conceptualize these relationships through participation and engagement of the whole academic system agents. And therefore, a constructivism, interpretivism philosophy can be appropriate for this research. Having all these theoretical positions and making their important contribution to appreciate the importance and impact of research philosophy, given the high consideration to make social integration between multiple realities, we need to gather these multiple perspectives from individuals and internationals. And therefore, I would conclude by saying that we need to have constructive interpretivism philosophy. Now, Dr. Harrison asked us, saying that how would you structure your research, or how would you consider the knowledge production processes, which are research, intervention, evaluation, and innovation? And to this, I have tried to answer that research, definitely it will be carried out throughout the research project. Whatever we do is called research. However, the main research like analysis and synthesis would be carried out in meta questions 1, 2, and 3. And these syntheses, whatever we are having research findings, will be interventional. That is, we will be asking questions from people, relevant stakeholders to understand, and that could be interventions to change our perceptions. And then we will also have likewise another group who would critique on that or evaluate what has been said so far within all the meta questions, the answers to meta questions. And finally, we will develop a model, or I'm not sure what it will be. The final outcome would be something innovation that can be called innovation. And I then found that what we need is, as our research methodology, I think we need transdisciplinarity. And here I argue that disciplinarity is a specialism in isolation. And multidisciplinarity is also specialism. It has multiple disciplines, but there is no cooperation. Whereas pluridisciplinarity, it does has coordination and cooperation between the disciplines. And the interdisciplines does have some answers. However, when I looked at the transdisciplinarity, I believe that this is what we need to adopt. And it is the reason that here we can see the interconnection, or we can interconnect or integrate our several disciplines, several knowledges, which we have gained at empirical level through some disciplines, and then pragmatic level where we have applied it. So for example, architect and engineering, agriculture and forestry. And to that, we will also think about how we can execute, that is, what is the planning, design, and what is the politics around it. And finally, what we value, and here I would say we value sustainable development, and that will be the driver for all these. And here, so what we want, and I have been telling here that we need to bring perspectives from the individuals and all relevant stakeholders. And that is what I mean by systems knowledge, where systems knowledge is like each and every individual have a say, and we would try to collect their responses. Whereas we also need the support of target knowledge, that is explicit people like who are illicit in this area, because they also have that knowledge to refine and critique of the common good, like what we want to do ahead. And also they are policy makers as well. So we need to bring the target knowledge also in here in our research. And this together, it will be integrated and presented in a way that it will transform everyone's knowledge, and that is called transformative knowledge we need to create. And this could be in a form of, I don't know, but it could be form of a framework, model, concept, or just a narrative explaining, developing a grounded theory. I am not sure what it would be, but we don't know the final product. But definitely it would be a transformative knowledge, because it would be collected from all this system and target knowledge. And this is again, I have here mentioned about some methods which may adopt, or we can still be open for other methods which would be relevant at that time and that point of the project. So systems knowledge, definitely by literature review or roundtable discussion, just as we are having now, to understand the theoretical representation and multidimensional framing from socio-economic, environmental, technology, institutional, and many others. And impact of developing, impact on development pathways from the local context. Survey questionnaire here, this survey questionnaire will collect, at the moment, it will collect systems thinking, but at the same point, we can have this survey questionnaire later on for our meta question 2 and 3, or it can be also for take a form of Dalfi questionnaire, which could then gather target knowledge as well as system knowledge. And then we can have several focus group who would try to identify, critique, and discuss. And that can be also in a different ways. These are only very broad methods which I have thought about. And so I will stop here and listen to your views now. So thank you very much for listening to me. But sorry, I think, do we want to continue with the recording of discussion or just this? Okay, I will see the comments, what you have written first of all. Okay, no comments for me actually. So what do you think?
Can I make a few comments?
Yes, please.
As a
You're welcome to do that.
As a contrarian,
Yes,
number one,
write down.
let me point out that I'm not, that Professor Calvente is not the oldest person on this call. I exceed him by several years. But number one, if you look at India currently and the problem with the small farmers versus the agricultural system, the issue is that the government is driven by the need for trade and export, which impacts on the entire infrastructure of agriculture in India. On the other hand, if you go back to the Pinochet government many years ago and look at what they were doing in terms of destroying any kind of agricultural support for the farmers from the public sector, you can see what happens when the government is not involved in it. So I don't think we can move forward with any kind of solution excluding the government because it works in both directions. The second issue is that academic institutions are not the same globally in the development world versus the developed economy. And therefore, the idea of the theory that you were just presented fits very well within the developed world, but does not work very well in a world of publish or perish with a diminished resources in the developing world. Again, with academics, they're still focused on publish or perish. I haven't heard a project talked about here that was interdisciplinary. In other words, that a biologist working with a philosopher or similar kinds of things, and probably not even a chemist working with a biologist, working with an agronomist in the field in a joint project. They're underfunded. The directions and the importance of the role of a faculty member in a university are all very well constricted in most of the developing countries. The third point is that funding is not available on a level that is needed in the developing countries, except those that come in from the developed countries, which then brings the development philosophy in, which is a driver. The other thing relates to the students. The students in the developing countries, whether you're at the postdoctoral level or at the undergraduate, or even particularly in the K-12 systems, are lacking in the fiscal and academic resources to support the kind of sophistication that you were talking about today. They're small projects, they're not scalable. There are examples globally, such as the Democracy Collaborative in the United States, and a number of other projects which are driven by select NGOs that are in the field over the long term. But the majority of these projects are short term and not sustainable and not scalable. And therefore, you need to look at all of these kinds of issues, which are totally being neglected in the applications of this. And the relating to that, the majority of these are small scale agricultural projects, which if you look at the impact locally and even globally, are small with regards to the kind of impact that the private sector can place in move. I'm looking at East Africa and the kind of projects that are going into Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and I'm also looking at projects that go into India and other countries, and they're not, and basically the size of these projects, the impact of these projects in the long term makes the university projects interesting, but not scalable. And while they may be satisfying on the short term, it's problematic. The ability to get students to participate in developing countries, in my experience working in these countries, is difficult because they have enough problems just getting basic education, and even in some instances paying for the education to be able to have the resources to get outside of the standard reading, writing, arithmetic, basic academic kinds of learning. In other words, the program is basically bound by its culture. The academic institution is bound by its culture, and the entire programs are limited by the fiscal and technical support that can be rendered to this at the local level. There are some very nice projects in Guatemala with dealing with forestry and forestry agriculture types of things, harvesting crops for markets and things like this, but they're local and they're not scalable because of the uniqueness of the agricultural or forestry resources and the ability of the experts, whether they are from the government sectors, the not NGO sectors, or the private sector, are strictly limited. So somewhere along the line, those issues have to be broken. And until the universities are willing to break the publish or perish promotion category, and till the governments are willing to adequately fund these kinds of things on a long-term sustainable basis, which very few NGOs can support. These are interesting. Case studies are interesting. They're good to present at conferences, but they don't have much applicability other than maybe an academic presentation in a classroom as an example, as opposed to being able to take it and put it into practice. The other issue is that students who are interested in these kinds of interesting things, Greta Thunberg is perhaps the paradigmatic example at the moment, is basically what one would consider folk politics. The same thing with Wall Street or the Arab Spring and the rest of these things, that they're not sustainable. They are driven by certain social models, but somewhere along the line, somebody has got to be able to commit those kinds of things outside of the paradigms that drive them. And the biggest paradigm to break right now is the university.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes. Looking at the projects of agriculture, which you have mentioned, I definitely agree with the India issue. My husband is in Indian politics, and he is a farmer as well, and he is leading on this movement. So I know all about it. And definitely, it's a chaos at the moment, and uh, it's a very bad situation for the farmers.
That's an interesting one, I can say that.
I
And
can
it's
give
got the
you
world
some
attention,
solutions.
and I don't know how the government is going to get out of the mess.
Yes, it is a very, very critical moment, I think. Yeah, and there's no solution at the moment from any side. Uh, However, I was trying to ask you that with this all these projects, I definitely agree that it should be it has some specific reality in the sense of it is contextualized into the local and very specific, whatever you mentioned, several things you mentioned about like cultural, fixal, technical influences are there. And it, any project is driven or can have an impact due to these all influences, right? However, I am trying to say that if we can analyze the successful projects or even the failure projects, that what went right and what went wrong in the design of the project, then would not that be applicable to elsewhere, depending again on their social and things, but the design itself, the process itself. So for example, if we say that yes, policymakers or the students and the institutional this should get engaged with one another, so that is one sort of process we are talking. And if that we identify, then will that not be globally applied? What do you think about that?
My experience, both in the US and primarily from the developed country perspective, but particularly from the developing country perspective, that the scalability is very hard to get because it varies based on the communities. As you know, probably in India, there are a number of groups of people, even in your agricultural sector, that basically have different capabilities, different interests, and things like this. And what we find I found in East Africa, I find in Central America, and in it depends on a lot of it depends on personality. In other words, the culture of the people that are the leaders within the community themselves, how easily they are to organize, the resources they have at their disposal, and the ability to sustain that beyond external funding disappearing or other issues within the communities themselves. It's scalability in small projects that are transferable. Uh, I think case studies are not interesting. What would be interesting would be to be able to get 50 case studies in a local area, or even and see why those succeeded and failed. And I think you will find that there is some commonality regarding the failure and the success being unique to that particular community. I'm having difficulty in my experience of finding any kind of scalability and being able to duplicate or scale these projects because of the culture that's involved. And I don't know any academic that we did one of the few projects that had philosophers talking with sociologists, working with biologists, working with chemists, working with engineers on multidisciplinary projects, but the teamwork required the commitment of those faculty members and the willingness to risk their publish or perish career. We lost several faculty members who left the universities because they didn't get tenure, because they didn't publish enough, or that the work that they were doing was not recognized. There's a couple of universities that encourage that. ANU in Australia, Arizona State University in the United States, and the East Coast universities in the United States, where the faculty have more freedom to be able to break the standard vertical rise in academia. But it depends on the situation, and scalability and duplicability is unique. And to try to basically case study those and to take that case study and map it into another project requires kind of creativity to pick out of those case studies what is useful, and to be able then to be able to transpose that and to mold it to meet the needs of the specific area or project or community in which they are working. The USAID found this out with renewable energy back in the mid 70s, early 80s. And to transfer it between countries, it becomes even more difficult. As I mentioned, the idea, the difference between what happens with Pinochet, which you're dealing with India. I don't think if you tell me how you're going to scale and deal with the problem in India with the government and the small farmers versus the large farmers versus the international trade impacts, then if you can solve that problem, you've got a good way to move forward in India. But if you don't have a solution right now, what is abstractable to be able to take that experience and work it in Pakistan or work it in Bangladesh? I mean, being in Bangladesh versus what is in India, which is, in Bangladesh, I was almost run over by bicycles on the bicycle interstates that run all the way through Bangladesh. It's an interesting, we have 2-year-old kids basically breaking rocks in order to provide aggregate for building in Bangladesh. There's so much that is unique and so much which is duplicable, but the pieces have to be rearranged and not transferable.
Yes, Tom, can I stop you for a while here? We can continue this, but Atalia is asking that he wants to put some comments, and because he wants to leave now. So yes, Atalia, please carry on.
I'm so sorry. I have to leave because my mother-in-law, she's 98 years old, and she fell a couple of months ago from her bed and she needs help. So I have to leave in a couple of minutes, but I feel so challenged and so happy here to get some experiences from all of you. And I would like just briefly to make a few comments. In Brazil now, we face a fascist government. It's fascist, if I can express myself, and no possibility of interacting with local government here where I live. They're fascists. And we have 4,000 deaths in Brazil yesterday. And the government is completely absent and saying there's no pandemic problem. It's a little problem, just a small code, and so on. So we are getting together in our local communities here. We have 64 local, very poor and vulnerable communities here. And we are working together with people from the Department of Ecology, the Department of Economics, Department of Engineering, in specific local actions. And I would like to comment a bit what Renuka was proposing in terms of meta questions. And first, I have studied a little bit of Guba Lincoln and reflexivity and interpretativism in local contexts, respecting local realities. And Lejano speaks of relationality. And Professor Quinchelo, who was at Penn State and then went to Canada, he organized the Paulo Freire Institute in Canada. And he brings the idea of bricolage, the multidimensional theoretical, philosophical, and methodological approaches, getting what we can from different paradigms and approaches. I'd like to just be short now. The connections of Professor Goulet on ethics of development, education for justice. Professor Goulet worked near Chicago for many years, and he married a Brazilian, a Pernambucana. He worked in India, he worked in many regions, and he likes to always talk about Gandhi. Professor Dennis Goulet was so nice, and he had cancer, and before dying, he gave me a lot of ideas on ethics of local development. And getting these connections, as Renuka points, from Vygotsky, the idea of social interaction, from Bakhtin, the idea of a dialogue of many voices, as we can share experiences, compare experiences, and adapt. The problem is we have to adapt to our local political situations, social cultures. And this is a challenge. When I was in Cornell, I met Professor Uphoff, Norman Uphoff. He kindly showed me his book, 800 Experience in India and many countries. And he was the one who helped Elinor Ostrom get her Nobel Prize in economics, where Elinor Ostrom brought the idea of social participation and the idea of cooperation between local cultures. And Professor Uphoff brought this beautiful book on biological approaches to sustainable soil systems, the interaction of social, technological, agricultural, ecological aspects to do some kind of contribution to local development. And I believe that intercultural education, as we get together, as we talk to each other, we learn a lot, and we think a lot, and we make reflections of possibilities. Sustainability is a political act, as education is a political act. So all the framework Renuka brought today was like a movie in my mind. It was exactly what I learned in my PhD here in UFRJ from other people in anthropology, in philosophy, in sociology, as I was blind to those ideas. You know, economics, when we study economics in the whole world, you learn neoliberal and such specific paradigm to talk about markets. And when you bring other approaches, when you bring like Quinchelo, a bricolage of different philosophical approaches, you have your horizon of comprehension enlarged. So I really believe that local experiences can be developed in small scales, because we have to face the corporations, we have to face Monsanto, we have to face all the political, economical structures. And we have a challenge. It's a challenge for us in Latin America and in Africa, in our global South, to develop our own frameworks, to develop our own ideas, which does not mean we are not to learn with other cultures and they say more developed ones, maybe economically and materialistically. I just want to make a conclusion, Renuka and my friends, that when I was in the government, in the federal government, in the years of 1975, 1976, and so on, they created one of the most important agriculture research institutions in the world, called Embrapa. Embrapa has been working in Africa and so many places. Embrapa is pretty much responsible for Brazil being the #1 in the production of soybeans, the production of meat, and so on, and large-scale modes of agricultural production, although people from Embrapa did not understand that you have to bring the technological approaches to culture, to reality, to social vulnerability. So that's what Renuka is pointing and directing us to think about. And just to make the conclusion, final conclusion, my friends, in the year 1977, we had a struggle. I almost had to leave the government. They decided, people from Embrapa and people from the United States together, World Bank together, that we should send 700 PhD students to study in Kansas, Michigan, and other universities in the USA, to study plant physiology, plant pathology, genetics, and so on. So they could bring back technologies to develop agriculture in Brazil. And that's what they did. 700 PhDs came back. But we know, with no political, sociological understanding of Brazilian culture. So they developed a highly developed agriculture here that's very good just for a few people. A few agro business people who have millions of dollars invested in agriculture, and they manage that from New York. As I was in Cornell, I met not only Professor Norman Uphoff, but a postdoctoral student. He was studying the Amazon. And he said, Attila, there are a few Americans here in Manhattan that just use their money to invest in the production of large-scale agriculture soybean in the Amazon. They're destroying everything. They're destroying everything just for money, just for profits. So it seems that this is not the way we need to do. We have to change, or global warming and climate change will come and will destroy their profits. Maybe it will take 10, 20 years, I don't know. So we are looking for something sustainable. Education for sustainability means going locally. We must go local in our own local context. And our challenge is, how can we use what Epictetus, a philosopher, taught us? Don't bother people with your things. I cannot bother you with my Pacacao project and my ideas. What I can do, my friends, is to share ideas and experiences, and maybe we can find different ways, different paths of local development to reduce, at least to reduce the impact of these large-scale Coca-Cola, soybean modes of production that will bring poverty, social inequality, destruction of biodiversity, and money just for a few. Just for a few. Like you know, in Brazil, we have the highest income concentration pattern in the world. So there's a lot to talk, and I think we must learn how to share these experiences. And the problem is we have to face a co-evolutionary process of culture, cognitive, and nature, as we learned with Norga Ard in ecological economics. There is a co-evolutionary process. And I appreciate very much, Renuka, the ability you had to organize the ideas. You gave me another course. I mean, I repeated the course I had in my university with Professor Gussi from a PhD in anthropology of education. And he taught us that we can share. Now we are organizing in the Cacao Project, another experience in Ceará. The northeast of Brazil is the poorest, one of the poorest places, maybe a bit like India. In the interior of India, we have so many people hungry there. So we are organizing in Ceará, in Rio de Janeiro, Pennsylvania, and I hope we can get our friends from different regions in Africa, and with your leadership, Renuka, to do whatever we can. And never forget, politics means the possible. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And exactly where my underpinning of this methodology, where these theories, which are systems thinking. So initially, when I did my PhD, I started investigating what was social technical theory. And then I moved to complex adaptive theory. And then I also again came to decoupling theory. And I found that this all again theory needs to be integrated. The framing which we have, we are looking from, like generally our policies are looked or based on economic framing. But when we think about social framing, then it is good again, but it emphasizes the use of resources. Then if we are looking at environmental framing, then again, there is a lot of things which stops our growth or development the way we want. So we need to bring all these framing together, and we need to be looking at multidimensional framing. We need to be always addressing from the multidimensional framing. So thank you very much today for all this discussion. I'm really very, very grateful for you all who have contributed to this discussion, and please continue to do so. I have taken all the points, and I'll try to address them when we are writing methodology. And I would invite everyone, whoever wants to join in writing, please jot down your points, please write down your part and send it to me. We will include in our publications. And that is what I'm inviting you today. So please do that. In addition to what I have said, it will be very useful to bring Tom's examples to also critique our theory, and also establishing the way we have tried to develop our methodology. And Atelia, I would please ask you to send me all this, what you have said in writing, so that we can again support our argument on whatever the methodology we are adopting, and establish that this methodology will allow us to make such a change, a very big change which we want to do. And the overarching, the value remains sustainable development. So any other thoughts or any other final comments you want to make before we close the meeting?
Renuka,
Yes.
can I? I want just to, there is a, I was part of, I will do it just quickly, and maybe I will write later details.
No, don't worry, please say.
Um, Before, in the last years, I was part of the one working group named Integrated Water Resource Management and Ethics. And it included members from, including me from Morocco and other researchers from South Africa, from Mozambique, from the UK, and from Holland. And we were trying, it was my first time to work with researchers from social science perspectives, because they had a lot of theories and methodologies concerning ethics in environmental resource natural resource management. And it was really a great challenge for me to, as a scientist working only from a technical point of view. And we tried to exchange a lot about this methodology in applying how to evaluate the ethics when we talk about water resource management. And we had the chance to work on many case studies, and maybe I can try to get in touch with the group, and maybe they can join the initiative to have at least one case study, for example, as a local case study that can be on which we can apply more methodologies and try to see which methodology can be adopted or not. Because as Attila said, there are difficulties in applying some methodologies from different parts from the world. There are many factors that varies from one country to another, and even inside the country, rather than a region. So maybe I can think about how I can bring this experience to the group.
That will be brilliant. That will be brilliant. All are very, like, I would encourage everyone to forward our invitation to join our network, join our project, or bring new projects. The way we want to grow, the way you want to grow, please try to engage and develop our network. It would be really brilliant. This is a call of I believe, a great movement, and we have to do it. We all have to contribute to do it. Yeah. So thank you very, very much today, especially joining us on this holiday. So thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.